Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the Awake and Thriving podcast. Today, we have with us again Victor Briere. He is the co-founder of IIA and an Ayurvedic doctor. Welcome back, Victor.
Thank you for having me again.
So we had a ton to talk about before on the first episode. And if you haven't seen that one, you should probably click into the podcast or the YouTube channel and look at that video or listen to that podcast because it kind of just goes on what is Ayurveda. So this is building off of that episode. And we're going to start off where kind of we left off. There was a ton to talk about. That's why you're back. So how does disease really work from an Ayurvedic point of view?
Differently than the Western point of view. So that's what we need to, we're starting from different places. And that's why it's so interesting to talk about, because it really is a different look altogether at why we stay healthy or why we get sick throughout the course of our life. You know, we hear a lot of things, or we were raised to hear a lot of things. It's your genes, or it's your something like that. Largely, Ayurveda says, yeah, sure, there are some things that come from family lineage, but whether or not they activate during your lifetime is largely up to the decisions you make and the choices you make as you go through your life. So what is a disease according to Ayurveda? There is an Ayurvedic sutra, which is like a phrase or a teaching in Ayurveda that basically says, look, we're going to talk about all these diseases and we're going to give them names. But at the heart of it, there is no name to a disease because everyone takes a unique pathway in each individual. Of course, they're going to have commonalities between conditions, and then we can label that a disease. But every Ayurvedic professional needs to remember, and does remember, that the pathology that any given person's experiencing is unique to that person. And it's the Ayurvedic doctor's job to uncover the pathology. So we say, hey, Jim, you've got diabetes. Mary, you've got diabetes. Susan, you've got diabetes. Mark, you've got diabetes. We use the same word for all those people. But Ayurvedically speaking, the way that disease has progressed throughout their system is different. They're going to have things in common, but at the heart of it, they're different. So they need to be treated differently, or addressed differently, I should say. Okay. And disease comes in Ayurveda when we leave our basic constitution out of balance for too long. So we have this unique proportion of elements and what are called doshas in Ayurveda. Some of the listeners may have heard Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Very unique to our own body and our own structure and how all our organs work and everything like that. We have this unique recipe, and we're healthy as long as we keep that recipe more or less intact. Of course, it's going to fluctuate and go left and right, but as long as it's within a realm of the original recipe, we'll stay vital. If something goes out too far and stays out too far, we start to experience symptoms. If we let those symptoms go, we start to get sick. If we get sick for too long, we get what we would call nowadays a chronic illness. And then if that goes on too long, it differentiates into a complication or another chronic illness. That's like a very quick version of how it works in Ayurveda, but that gives you the basic idea.
And I feel like in the West, in Western medicine, we're not taught to go see the doctor unless there's an issue. So there has to be like a main issue, like a big symptom for them to go. So they're not looking at they're not paying attention to their body and the little changes that are occurring until they have to go rush to the doctor for some reason.
Sure. So there's an easy example I like to use. So basic pathology, Ayurvedically speaking, let's say you have someone and let's pretend they're imbalanced. Mm-hmm. But day after day, they're going and they're eating too much spicy food, mm-hmm. then their body can metabolize and properly handle. Mm-hmm. So that creates hyperacidity in the stomach, just a little bit, nothing big deal. Maybe they don't even feel it. So there's no symptom. But according to Ayurveda, that disease pathology begins there, way before a symptom even appears. And so Then let's say that continues day after day, that acidity very slowly builds up and very slowly starts to wear on some of the tissues in the stomach. Eventually it causes some agitation and you get a little bit of like hyperacidity symptom, like, ooh, I feel like some acid or maybe some acid reflux or something like that. That's a very early warning sign. Let's say the habits don't change. It goes on, or maybe they even get worse, or maybe something else that isn't about eating spicy food, but also starts to acidify the body, like stress, comes into play. So they hit a period of stress in their life. So now that even gets worse. So the symptom, the cause, the root cause is getting doubled up on. So now they get some inflammation in their stomach. So now they have gastritis. So then now they're feeling something like, ooh, like, I don't like, this doesn't feel good. I feel tender. I feel, and plus the acidity, right? But that's it. That gets left undealt with, or they take a palliative like a Tums or something, which doesn't deal with the root cause. It only deals with the symptom, which can create a problem in and of itself, but we'll deal with that another time. So then let's say that goes on and that left unchecked, but eventually that hyperacidity eats through the lining of the stomach. And now there's a wound in the stomach wall. That's called an ulcer. And let's say, oh, right. So now they take an antacid or like a strong antacid to reduce the acid so that the ulcer heals. Okay. But those antacids are very powerful. So the stomach acid becomes very weak, then doesn't digest food well. So now you have poorly digested food going through the digestive tract, being absorbed into the system. And let's say that causes a lower abdominal issue, like constipation or excess gas or bloating, or some kind of like inflammatory colon issue, something like that, right? So the ulcer went away, but now this other issue is present. So it's like, oh man, I had the stomach issue. Now I got this bowel issue, but we don't say those two things are the same. But in Ayurveda, that is the pathology. So now the colon goes off and now maybe the colon's off and let's say it's constipation in this case, and Vata dosha can't flow freely. So all the movements in the body are obstructed from the lack of fluidity in the colon movements. And now someone gets headaches. And now they get migraines. And then if things keep going 15, 20 years down the line, they get Alzheimer's. Ayurvedically speaking, that final diagnosis of Alzheimer's started with the unnoticed acidic stomach. That's very different from the way it's talked about these days.
Yeah, I feel like you're describing, unfortunately, like a lot of the population, because that's people just pop, especially Tums. That's like everyone's popping Tums. Like when I was little, my grandma used to eat them, and I thought they tasted good, so I would eat.
Sure.
I didn't realize they were bad, and obviously I didn't do that a lot, but that's a lot of our population, even people that are close to me that have that. So
yeah, so that's called in Ayurveda, that's called samprapti, is the Sanskrit word for it. It's called pathology. And it's what Ayurveda is really, really is like almost begging everyone to do, is saying, look, when it's just a little excess stomach acid, it's so easy to fix. Just stop eating spicy food. And your body will take care of itself because it's so close to balance that something that goes out just a little bit, right back in place, right? But once it's gone through all this twists and turns and winds and things and complications and all that stuff, now it's so hard to reverse.
And do you recommend, for like, just depending on the person, you would recommend herbal supplements for that versus like along with Tums, or it just depends on the individual?
So depends on the individual, right? Of course.
Yeah.
What I would do for symptoms, or what I typically do for symptoms, of course, you want to address the symptom. Symptoms part of the pathology and it's an indicator, but not just the symptom. We got to address the root cause. Herbs are great at addressing symptoms. They're great. So you take an herb or you take a combination of herbs and it has a specific effect on the body. Fantastic. Herbs are not like prescription medicine most of the time. They move in and out of the system much more gently. For the most part, there are some very powerful herbs, but when we're talking about just basic Ayurvedic herbs, they're much more graceful in their effect on the body than a pharmaceutical just goes wham, and like doesn't care what else it's hitting.
Yeah.
But when you get to the root cause, you're talking about lifestyle. I'm going to eat the spicy food. It's like, well, if we're just talking lifestyle, for this person at this time, they need to avoid the spicy food. And then their problem's going to go away. Because you can eat the super spicy food, and then I can give you an herb to counteract that effect, but I'm not dealing with the root cause.
Which is the spicy food.
Which is the spicy food. And then don't forget, part of that pathology was the stress.
Yeah,
right. So that's how it gets tricky, because we have a tendency with our Western mind to say, oh, I want to point at gluten. I want to point at a vitamin D deficiency. That's the source of all my problems. Yeah. But the reality is it's like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 things all coming together all at once.
And that makes sense, especially with our day and age. There's so many things coming all at us all at once. We're not really adapted to that quite yet.
Right. So someone's lifestyle might be predisposing to experience a certain pathology. A high-powered executive under a lot of stress might be okay until the day that maybe he's good at handling, or she is good at handling, work stress. But the moment that the work stress mixes with a relational stress, drives them to do some comfort eating, and that's when the symptoms start. It took all 3 of those factors to create the pathology. The body was resilient enough until that point.
It's funny how you can look back in hindsight and you're like, I wish I could have just like avoided this, and maybe I wouldn't have gotten that. Because there's stuff in my life that I look back on, like stress, and I can see the stress. It was very apparent, but there's things that happened, and it's not something significant like what you're talking about even, but it's stuff that I was like, I feel like that was turned on or came to be because of the acute stress I was under at work. So, but something I'm working with.
Yeah. And that's why we hire professionals to turn our hindsight into foresight. And I have one too, right? Doctors need doctors, everything like that. And so they know the hindsight of other people, and they could use that for you as foresight. And it can be a huge benefit to all of us, because we can avoid so many problems. I mean, famous quote by the Dalai Lama is, I don't think it was this one, I think it was the previous one, that, we go through our whole life building wealth only to spend it all on our health, because we destroyed our health building our wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally believe that, especially when it comes to being in corporate America. Like, you're making a ton of money, but your health is down the drain. You don't really have a work-life balance like at all.
Yeah.
So, and then, so this plays into chronic illness, which would be like diabetes, is hypertension, obesity, that kind of stuff. So when it comes to that, I'm imagining that is lifestyle. So that would be a process of people having to really commit to changing some things in their lives.
Yeah, those are lifestyle diseases. They have that name for a reason. They usually come about because of people's lifestyle choices, as opposed to someone being born with a certain malady or something like that,
Yeah.
Largely diabetes, hypertension, and obesity are created by our choices. And so that's where Ayurveda really shines, is dealing with these lifestyle diseases in the West, because we can learn to make different choices. And they seem so like, oh my God, no, I don't want to give that up. Or, I think I'm willing to give that up. But then when I actually hit the moment where I got to give it up, or I got to add this new thing, because it's not always giving up. Sometimes it's adding a new thing, like exercise or whatnot. Then it's like, oh no, I just can't. But then it's like, okay, let's take a few deep breaths and do it. And it's like, oh, this is great. I love this. Yeah. I feel wonderful. I feel so much happier. I feel, all that stuff.
Yeah. It's that moment of having to actually do it. Like, once they jump, they're like, okay, this wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Yeah. The mind creates all these dragons that we have to contend with. And in reality, they're much smaller than we think they are in our mind.
So when you talk to people about chronic illnesses, your visits are long. I think I remember going over this with you. So you would go over kind of what they do, like their lifestyle, nutrition, all of that. Is that correct?
Definitely. Yeah. My first meeting with someone is 45 minutes to an hour.
Okay.
And that's typically most of the time that's going to be followed up in a few days by another half an hour meeting. And then we just continue on from there because it's so important to talk in the healing process and to get into the nitty gritty of the individual's life and say, what are the sticking points for you? Not are what are some broad strokes, general sticking points that everyone faces.
Yeah.
What are your problems? And we need to solve those together. That's the idea behind an Ayurvedic approach to health.
What do you, and so I'm going to ask you a question. It's pretty like a broad question, but just like when you encounter people that have like problems sleeping and they've tried like melatonin, they've tried valerian root, they've tried blackout curtains. What do you usually, what kind of issues do you, I know that's a broad question,
Sure.
but what do you think about stuff like that? That's not me. I sleep like a baby.
Yeah. So there are a lot of factors that go into sleep. Sleep is one of the pillars of life in Ayurveda. Sleep, the pillar of life, meaning there are three of them: sleep, food, and relationship. And if one of them goes down, your health starts to suffer. If two of them go down, you're in trouble. And if three of them go down, you're gone.
Oh,
Yeah. So,
yes, that makes
so
sense. Yeah.
right. So like right now, the general social crisis is the third one, relational, because of all the extreme isolation that's going on because of COVID. And it's having a massive impact on people's health profiles, disease rates, diabetes rates, depression rates, all those things are skyrocketing. Sleep issues are among those. That's what reminded me of that. So sleep, one of the pillars of health, extremely sensitive to your stress level, state of mind, mental activity, nervous system activity. I think last episode we mentioned the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
Has a lot to do with the mind-body connection. Sleep is huge for that. So biggest factors in driving sleepless nights are relational issues a lot of times, challenges there. Dietary habits for sure affect sleep. When you eat and what you eat are massive in affecting your sleep profile. You cannot eat a heavy dinner and take a melatonin if you have a sleep issue and expect that your problem will be solved. You've got to deal with the lifestyle issue of eating a heavy late dinner if you want your body to get back into a sleep rhythm. Because let's not forget, there are consequences to counterbalancing a negative lifestyle habit. It might be okay to do for a period of time to get you through something, but as a long range plan for your health, it's not the best idea. It's like if I injure my right knee and start hobbling with my left leg, it's if I don't correct that right knee, before long, I'm going to start having issues with my right leg.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as having a lifestyle issue that's not healthy and then using something like melatonin to compensate for that. If you don't address the cause, over time, the thing that's upholding you and that's compensating is going to give way as well.
Okay.
So what do I recommend? Earlier dinner. There should be a ramp down period at night where you turn the screens off. You enter into much more of a parasympathetic or calming environment if possible. So don't have big blow up fights. Boundaries need to be put around personal time. More what we would call in Ayurveda sattvic activities, things that are light on the mind and uplifting in general should take place. So don't go watch a horror movie. Don't watch the news. Take a bath. Take something, listen to beautiful music. Surround your senses with beauty and peace is hugely effective. And that needs to go on for a period of time before you actually lay down to finally go to sleep. There are some meditations or breathing practices one can do. And also honoring your circadian rhythm. So cultivating a lifestyle where you go to bed at the appropriate time, which is people who suffer from insomnia oftentimes were night owls prior to suffering from insomnia. Oftentimes, not always, but many times. So going to bed by 10, waking up at the right time, avoiding excessive use of caffeine. I drink 4 cups of coffee in the morning. No, I don't. One were to drink 4 cups of coffee in the morning and 2 glasses of wine at night, certainly going to affect your sleep cycles.
So alcohol plays into that.
Oh, alcohol has a massive effect on sleep. And that's not just an Ayurvedic point of view. There's hundreds of studies done on that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but Ayurveda would completely agree and say, look, even this, someone drinks even a cup of coffee in the morning, that's going to affect your circadian rhythm. And if you're already having sleep issues, it's going to impact your sleep cycles.
Okay. And then so if you already have sleep issues, you drink coffee and then you drink alcohol in the evening, it's no wonder that you have sleep problems.
Yeah. Plus, maybe there's a reason. And that's where the big stuff comes in. Maybe there's a reason that you're engaging in those behaviors. And that's not something that's like, oh, just, stop doing it and that's the end of the story. Yeah, sure, stop doing the lifestyle behavior, but there's the other big question as to why do I want to do these things? Even why am I so attached to my cup of coffee, or why am I so attached to my glass of wine? And that I'm not putting a judgment on that. I'm saying that's a real question that someone could ask themselves, and they might be surprised at what the answers are.
Yeah, because if I ask myself, why do I want a cup of coffee in the morning? I think I would say it's because it's kind of nostalgic to me because it reminds me of my grandparents. And
That is, I love that answer. Thank you so much.
so,
I want to cut you off there for a reason, not to be rude.
okay.
But that is exactly what happens, and that's why lifestyle is so important. Food is not food. Food is a projection of our emotions onto a substance.
Yeah.
We do that constantly. We do it all the time, and that's why we're attached to certain foods. And you just did it beautifully. And for our listeners and viewers, we did not talk about that before the episode.
No, yeah. That was a pure thought. That's exactly how especially if I smell a certain combo, I'm like, this reminds me of my grandma. And it's exactly why I still drink it. But.
And so that's great. And I'm not saying that, forget about that whole aspect, but it's important to understand when we go and it's like, okay, time to give up coffee because it's creating a health problem.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't want to, right? It's like, why? Because it feels like love to me. It feels like my grandma.
Yeah. And I've had to cut back my caffeine a lot, because before, where I worked at, I was constantly drinking coffee all day, but because of some health stuff, which was flared up when I took caffeine. So I had to cut my caffeine down to just 1 cup a day. So that's usually just early in the morning. And that's, unless I try to drink some kind of energy thing, I don't have any issues. So.
Yeah. And, it's a powerful stimulant. Coffee is very acidic and all that stuff. So I'm not saying that it's terrible for everyone at all times, but in general, our culture drinks way too much of it and it creates health problems.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of attachment to it. That's the important part, because when we start to change our lifestyle habits that are creating lifestyle diseases like hypertension, obesity, diabetes, you name it, we're actually wrestling with our emotional attachments. We're not so much wrestling with the food itself. And that's very important because, and that's what COVID shows us, is that when a lot of our emotional attachments are stripped away from us, our nervous systems go haywire, and it creates a tough environment for us to live in our own body. Yeah. And part of healing is learning how to address all that in a healthy way.
And that kind of plays into, because you were saying we're attached to certain foods, and depending on what culture you are, you're attached to foods that may not be the best for you, depending on what you're dealing with as a lifestyle disease. Some of them may be rice. Rice is common in a lot of people's diets, and usually it's in their culture. So that plays into nutrition a little bit. I know we talked a little bit about that. So what do you think about connecting all that? Because it would be hard to tell certain people, oh, you can't have, for Hispanics, you can't have red rice or beans, or for maybe Asians, you can't have any white rice,
right?
Because that's a part of that's their childhood. That's what they remember.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have to start by talking about that, and hopefully that in the consultation, we come to an agreement. Okay, I get it. I love, even though white rice isn't the food for me to eat right now, I love it so much because it reminds me of my mom, or it reminds me of my brother, or my sister, or my father, or my uncle, or whatever. Whoever the person who loved me the most, right, was the one feeding me rice. And it does need to be addressed, and it does need to be honored, because I don't want the person sitting in front of me. It's important to their health to feel loved. They can't just go on into the void of never feeling that feeling of love.
Yeah.
So we have to create a whole protocol that maybe gets rid of life, but also keeps the feeling that they're taking care of themselves and being taken care of, both intact. That's the art. That's the art with any given individual, is how are we going to create that together?
Okay.
Yeah. So it's huge, because we like to think we're making decisions based on nutrition. It's very rarely the case.
Yeah, definitely. And I can see, like, now that you brought that up, there's certain things that I do eat, like oatmeal. My grandma used to make every morning. I don't eat it very often, but I eat it most of the time. I'm like, oh, I need something like a comfort food, I'll have oatmeal or green onions, because that's for my grandmother as well. So they're not terrible things, but depending on what I was going through, oatmeal may not have been like the best thing for me to have every morning with a whole bunch of sugar and milk in it.
Exactly. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. You're describing it perfectly. That is exactly how it works.
Perfect. So nutrition, I've talked to a lot of people about nutrition, and I have my own things about nutrition. What do you think about nutrition? Like, tell me your stance on nutrition.
I'll tell you my stance, which is also the Ayurvedic stance.
Okay.
Nutrition, that lovely word. So we as a Western culture are very geared towards, what are the nutrients? What's inside this thing that I'm eating or drinking? Give me the label on the box, and that will tell me what's inside this thing I'm eating. And it gets broken down into vitamin A, B, C, D, protein, blah, 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 on and on. I like to be a little bit coy, in all honesty, and play around with people I have that conversation with, because have you ever seen a protein? Have you ever seen vitamin A? No one really knows what it is. I mean, unless you're a scientist looking under a microscope, right? So we just think, oh yeah, I need vitamin A. Because why? Because I don't know, I heard it somewhere, right? I need vitamin, and that's what's happening here. I'm saying Ayurveda does this and that. And people are like, well, why'd you go to an Ayurvedic doctor? It's like, I heard about it somewhere. That's how we operate. How else are we going to do it? We're not going to sit there in a lab and take our, carrot and say, oh, look, there's vitamin, whatever.
Yeah.
We're not going to do that. So I like to get honest about that before talking about nutrition. And then I like to talk about the other side of nutrition, which is your body. Your body, if you eat a carrot's got stuff in it, but how does your body respond to that carrot? If your body's all messed up, if you have all these digestive issues, it doesn't matter what's in that carrot. You're not going to get the good stuff out of it. So, but we like to forget that. We like to think, oh, if I'm going to be healthy, I need these nutrients. But if you're going to be healthy, what about the health of your own body? So we get into this scheme where it's like, the new thing comes out, and by the way, someone's making millions upon millions upon millions of dollars by doing this. Let's not forget about that convenient fact, right? Gluten. Blame gluten. It's all gluten's fault. But 6 months ago, it was something else's fault. And lectins. And 6 months before that, it was something else's fault. And then, oh, look at this superfood. And if you eat this superfood, you're going to be fine because it's antioxidant. Like whatever, right? It keeps switching on us.
Yeah.
And we keep going for it, because what else are we going to do? But that's the important part, is that let's expand that dialogue. Let's say, okay, gluten. Let's say gluten is a little bit hard to digest. Let's say even Ayurveda says gluten's considered a heavy thing. Wheat is heavy. But what's the other side of that? It's very building. It can strengthen tissue very well. It's got a lot of nourishment in it, if your body can handle it. And that's the big question people need to start focusing on much more, is I can eat gluten. Why can I eat gluten and you can't? And it's not because of some gene that's floating around in your body that is activating or not activating or whatever. Sometimes in a case of like someone who genuinely has celiac disease, it is, but not for the vast majority. So what's wrong? There's a digestive disturbance. And so the heavier foods are harder to digest, so they create problems. But don't just blame gluten. So when someone says, I feel so much better now that I'm off gluten and sugar, it's like, great. But to an Ayurvedic doctor, it's going to be like, why were they having a problem digesting gluten and sugar? They should be able to digest gluten and sugar. We got to get to that layer. Okay. That's where Ayurveda operates.
And
so
that's, wow, that's like a totally different perspective than anything that most people are used to, because most of the time, like even now, people I talk to, their diets haven't changed. And I asked them, I was like, well, did you tell your doctor this is what you eat? They're all, well, no, they didn't ask any of that. I was like, you know why? Because they're just going to increase your prescription.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, that's the case.
Yeah. So
now I should say that globally, there are doctors who are starting to talk about it.
Yeah.
But this has been a topic of holistic healing systems, I mean, from the get-go. So it's like,
everyone else is playing catch up right now.
I guess
that's what's happening. Everyone's playing catch up. So, so nutrition is just depends on the person. A lot of people, I know they have allergies, but I don't think a lot of people get tested to see if they have like real allergies to food. They just notice, like they do an elimination diet, which like you said, they take stuff out of their diet and they feel better. So, but they don't get to the root cause of why they're actually sensitive to that, which may not be an allergy. It may be something else that's occurring.
You got it. That's exactly right. And now, so that's the other thing we like to do with our Western minds. We like to compartmentalize our issues. So if I'm having trouble digesting wheat, it must be something to do with food that's causing my problem. What about all the other areas of your life? What about the other two pillars of health, which is sleep and relationship? Why aren't those being factored into why I can't digest wheat? Because if I get into a huge blowout argument with my significant other and I'm afraid they're going to leave me and I'm stressed out and freaked out and worried about the kids and everything like that, of course that's going to impact my digestion. That's going to impact my digestion more than eating the gluten.
Yeah.
So, but we don't think of it that way. It's like nutritional problem must be answered by nutritional means. It's almost never the case.
Yeah. And I remember when I used to get really stressed out at work, I would definitely have, and I knew it, like it's something that I knew about myself, that like my lower part, my digestive system would like shut off. Like I would be like, oh, and it's because I was so stressed. I wasn't like drinking water, even paying attention to it. And I think that happens to a lot of people. And hopefully in the next 10 years or so, we become more enlightened to our bodies and more in tune with them.
Yeah, it's happening. People are, in all seriousness, I'm not just saying that. People are waking up to those body awarenesses and realities, in part because they're tired of, just dealing with their symptoms. It's like, I need a deeper answer here. I can't just spend the rest of my life taking pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. So for nutrition, you recommend like just a regular, depending on what the person's going through. There's so many, everyone's so different. And I can imagine what you get in your office. You get a plethora of people with all sorts of lifestyle diseases and stuff that they're going through. So you talk to them about nutrition and you talk to them about lifestyle, and those just kind of go hand in hand and are different for each, correct?
Yeah. And, almost always in a consultation, someone will just bring up naturally on their own, saying, I'm really dealing with this issue. And it might be a blend of all three of those, the relational, the dietary, and the lifestyle, because they're also interwoven, right?
Yeah.
And so here's a typical conversation. Okay, so you're dealing with some sleep issues. So what time are you eating dinner? Then the person would respond, I eat dinner at 9:00 at night. And what is your dinner? Oh, typically I eat chicken and some vegetables and I say, how do you feel after that? It's like, yeah, I feel pretty gross. I know it affects my sleep. We'll say that. And then here we go. Let's change it to 6:00. I can't do that. Why? My spouse likes to eat late. Bam, you're right into the relational.
Yeah.
Unless that relational component gets resolved, no change is going to happen and the pathology will perpetuate.
Yeah. It's funny, right. You're kind of hitting on some of the things that are occurring in my relationship right now, which I love him immensely. He's the most wonderful man I've ever had in my life. I'm keeping him, but keeping him, but our eating patterns are different. I like to eat early and he likes to eat late. So I'm like, we need to eat early because eating late is not the thing to do for me or for you. So
Yeah, so there are a lot of solutions to those issues. Sometimes the spouses are like, yeah, I'm on board, let's change it.
yeah,
Or sometimes it takes a little bit more, there's a conflict. And a lot of people are afraid of conflict, especially with their intimate partners. And that all is part of the things that need to get drudged up in the change.
yeah,
And that's why change is not so simple, but still just as necessary as before.
yeah, definitely.
And I've had some people tell me straight up, and I applaud their honesty. I'm not going to change that. I don't care if it makes me sick. I'm not going to change that habit. And you know what? I applaud that honesty because I feel like a lot of people are actually thinking that way, but are too afraid to say that, maybe to themselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I feel like sometimes people give us lip service and they're not telling us the truth for sure. All right.
Yeah, it's complicated, of course.
Yes, absolutely. So leading into, so we talked about nutrition a little bit, and this topic, I don't think I've ever spoken to somebody about this before, especially somebody with Ayurveda. Addiction and Ayurveda, how does that work together? I'm all ears because I know nothing about those two together.
All right. Addiction and Ayurveda is a really wonderful topic because it hits a lot of the deep stuff. So there are a few layers. Where do I want to get into it first? The first I would say is that go to the Ayurvedic definition of someone healthy. The Ayurvedic definition of health is, for the most part, your body's and it has a state of homeostasis. There's an equilibrium going on. Your tissues are healthy. Your organs are functioning in harmony and well. You're free from pain, free from digestive distress, so on and so forth. And then the big highlighted one, the mind is free from suffering. So let's pause with that, because how many people do we know whose minds are free from suffering? One, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Not a lot.
So, but that's the definition, and that's not meant to just be poetic. That's saying, look, there's something to this mind thing, right? The mind and the body are completely connected. They are one. So we can talk about a mind and we can talk about a body, but that's just for conversational purposes. The reality is they're one entity. So if the mind is suffering, and addiction is a form of suffering, then that person's not going to achieve a state of complete health. They will not be completely healthy. They might be healthy to a point, but they're not going to be completely healthy. And so that's a start. What is an addiction according to Ayurveda? There is a psychological and like the Western psychological model of addiction that is very specific, but I want to broaden it a little bit and to say the Ayurvedic definition of addiction is more like bonding gone wrong. So as human beings, we need to bond. We will bond. The idea that we can be an island and be completely autonomous and not need anyone for anything is a complete mythology. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the person that was used to display that image the most was the Marlboro cowboy, right? Who's this like rough, tough cowboy who can be isolated for however long he wants. And he's completely independent and he doesn't need no one and doesn't take nothing from no one. And he's the model of the male, right? Well, guess what he got paired with? One of the biggest addictions known to mankind of all time, right? There's a reason that the marketing people are like, oh, jackpot, right? Take autonomy and addiction, bam, put them together and you got a winner. Yeah. So there's a lot there. But the idea is humans are going to bond. And if we don't bond with other humans, we're going to bond with a substance or a behavior or the avoidance of a substance. So we'll take 3 examples. Bonding with a substance, easy. We all know it. I bond with sugar. I bond with alcohol. I bond with cigarettes. I bond with whatever, right? Bonding with a person in a healthy way, let's say, healthy relationships. And that's probably another podcast on its own. What is a healthy relationship and what's not? And there are thousands of viewpoints on that. But we all get the idea, right? Sometimes we can look at a relationship and be like, oh yeah, that's a pretty healthy relationship, right? And then we look at relationships like, whoa, not healthy. That relationship is not healthy. It's glaringly obvious, right? And then the third is we can bond with the avoidance of something, like an eating disorder. Like I bond with not eating to control my environment or to control myself. So that's kind of a gist of what addiction means in a larger sense. And then in that way, you have a severity scale where some people are severely afraid of bonding with other people in a healthy way. And so they will latch onto a substance or a person in a codependent way, or they'll avoid things to an extreme degree. It's all based around fear. And it is, and everyone experiences it. That's the big part. Everyone, me, you, everyone. So when we look at someone who's suffering from a severe addiction, oftentimes we recoil or we treat them in an isolating fashion. Oh, that person's got a major drinking problem. Don't interact with that person, right? Stay away. But that's probably part of the pathology that caused their addictive mindset to begin with, is the isolation from connection. So there's a great book. Johan Harish did a wonderful TED talk on this topic exactly. And he very much expresses, he's not an Ayurvedic professional himself, but he really does express the Ayurvedic viewpoint around all this. He wrote a book called Lost Connections, talks a lot about connecting and how we treat addicts societally and stuff like that. Even the word addict as a label is very, has a charge. But what Ayurveda says is restore the health of proper relationship and the addiction will fall away. Because that's what they are. That's where they came from. That's the root cause. The root cause is bonding gone wrong. So, I was in an abusive household, or I didn't receive love growing up, or, I couldn't get my needs met growing up. So relationships became threatening. And in whatever way they became threatening, I decided it was better to bond with something else to make me feel good or to relieve me from my pain temporarily than it is to venture and dare rekindling relationship. Maybe not with the person who dealt the damage, but maybe even with new people.
Yeah. Like they'll keep going for those same maybe characteristics with people.
Yeah. And so it's a big deal because that's where we run into the coffee grandma matrix, right? Yeah. So, but then now think of that's a positive memory. That's a good, like a happy association.
Yeah.
But now just make a negative association with the same type of thinking and you get addiction. So like
I had a good childhood, but I'm like, let me think of, I don't know if I'm really good at like letting go of bad memories. I'm like, oh, like I don't need that in my life. Cut it out. And I totally won't remember it again.
Sure. So you could just take someone who smokes cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
They're either going to actually have probably maybe a positive memory, like, oh yeah, one of the best nights I ever had was finally talking to my dad, who was a smoker at the age of like 19. I talked to him finally, we finally connected. And that was the night he offered me a cigarette. So there's a bonding right there. That used the cigarette as a symbol of the bond. Or and much more frequently with an addiction like smoking is a negative experience. Like, I was yelled at and emotionally abused and driven. Like as a teenager, I left my house and I was so upset. And, one of my friends at the time said, here, just smoke this with me. And it was like, well, fine. That's the only connection I could have at the moment. And I smoked the cigarette and feel that feeling in my body. And now I feel a certain way that I didn't feel like at home. And so this is something that helps me feel better.
Now that you say that, the last year could have sparked a lot of bad habits from people being isolated and wanting to bond with anything.
Bingo. And that is what actually happened. So we don't need to imagine the scenario. That is what's going on. Addiction rates are climbing like crazy. And it's because it's bonding gone wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. We're gonna have to deal with this for a long time coming. Some people won't even realize they have it for a while.
Yeah. And the best thing we can do is reach out in a healthy way and talk to people and reconnect. And, for people who are aware and for people who are like, I know that the reason I'm eating this ice cream compulsively is because I'm lonely. For people who have made that connection, then on the other side, to find ways to reconnect, or even now, or on the other side, to then intentionally seek out proper bonding is going to go a long way in making sure that those addictions don't set in and cause health problems.
Yeah. Because I moved to a new county, Orange County, and I didn't have any friends here. And I felt lonely, and it was COVID. And I was like, I need to make friends. I need to make friends now. Like, I feel the need. Slowly but surely, I was able to do that. But for people that are in different areas, I'm sure it was a lot harder for them to make friends, or people that aren't as sociable. I don't think I'm that sociable, but I do know when I need a friend and I need to make new friends.
Yeah. And I mean, just so people know, it's because it's a nervous system thing. We're talking about our autonomic nervous system here, and we don't have conscious control over it. We have conscious influence over it, but not control like we do our, arm or leg or whatnot. And the autonomic nervous system, that's why someone says, yeah, tomorrow's the day I'm going to give this thing up. And it's like, yeah, next day, same process, because it's driven by the autonomic nervous system, which happens below the surface. So learning how to work and massage our own autonomic nervous system is a big deal in this process. And even, here's the beauty of it. Any other mammal can serve as a healthy bonding experience. That could be a cat, that could be a dog, that could be whatever. It doesn't have to be a human.
I love that. I love dogs.
Yeah, and they are great for you.
Yeah, they are. My dog's always sleeping on the couch while I'm working.
Yeah, they are a source of bonding, and I mean that in a healthy way for the nervous system.
Okay, that's good to know. I've read that before. And for people that don't have animals, I'm like, you really need to get an animal.
Yeah,
Especially,
and so I will use that as for some people as a solution in the clinic. If someone's really dealing with isolation issues or severe health issues, especially of the lower gut, and they can take care of an animal, it's possible. I will absolutely make that lifestyle suggestion.
okay.
It's fantastic. And see, Ayurveda would consider that a form of medicine,
Oh,
the appropriate application of a lifestyle.
okay. All right.
You know,
Well, and that's what I'm recommending to my dad too, because he's alone.
and it's a great recommendation.
Well, thank you for being on the podcast again. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me again. You're wonderful at asking the right questions.
Thank you very much.